Hi again. If you're wondering why there was no devlog last week or why there is another double upload, then you obviously don't follow me on Twitter. Anyways, this time it was part of administrative reasons, which are basically I had a Halloween party and we played a little bit of Vampire the Masquerade and I couldn't record on time. And I think it's gonna be late because I've been having trouble with my editing software and my internet since our new neighbors moved in, so this might be even online way later. Maybe there will be a double upload in terms of devlogs. I'm not sure how I'm going to handle this, but yeah. And before we start with the video, I'd like to announce that I have made separate accounts for all game-related stuff. So if you want to follow me in terms of my game progress, you might be interested in following me on Twitter or Instagram, and especially if you're not interested in my usual delusions, you might find these accounts more interesting to follow. They are not very active yet. I hope that will change in a few weeks. Yeah, but I'll be glad either way if you decided to check them out. Yeah, I feel the need to get personal issues out of the way first again. If you don't care about this or don't want to hear about this, then feel free to skip this segment. I will put a timestamp on screen and in the description so you can skip it. The last 2 weeks were not good, to be honest, and it seems to be a combination of multiple factors. Surprisingly, the return to standard time isn't one of them. I've always felt more comfortable during the winter seasons regarding my time schedule than like in the summer months, but I know a lot of people who don't handle this as well. There's a lot of research on this and I found it very interesting to read, but that's not the topic, sorry. I mentioned the sad boy hours before, which if you haven't watched the devlog from week 2 is me saying that I feel like absolute trash for a week or so, and since then I haven't had another episode of that. In turn, this makes me rule out 2 of the 3 main causes which I was suspecting, which were the weather and my changed eating habits. I don't know what causes this, maybe it's even my medication, and especially for these devlogs I will try and keep a closer eye on those possible causes, but at the moment there is little I can do about these, which is tragic, because I lost a lot of time because of this and I get scared when I think about actually working at a studio because I'm afraid of what kind of impact this is going to have on my work. Part of the whole issue are nightly panic attacks. I'm not even sure what these are, I just started calling them that because it's the closest to what I can imagine them being. For the past 2 weeks I've been waking up in the middle of the night with a severe sense of dread. Like I know something bad is going to happen or that I'm going to die, and it's like very high anxiety. What's even worse is this feeling I get in my hands and my legs that I can't really describe. It's like I can't feel them, but it's not in the sense of them falling asleep. It's more like some kind of phantom pain, or maybe like if you play something in VR, you can see, like most of the time you can maybe see your hands, but they're not yours and you don't feel them in that way, if that makes sense. It's really hard to explain. And I actually thought that those were nightmares up until I went to the bathroom and the next morning my mom asked me about this. So that confirmed the suspicion that it's actually real and not just a nightmare. As you can imagine, this has been having negative impact on my sleep quality. So yeah, the last 2 weeks weren't very good and I have been trying to compensate that with coffee, but I'm not sure if that's a good idea because it hasn't really worked. So now let's get to something less depressing, and that's the progress of my game. As mentioned in the last devlog, I sent the prototype out to a few QA testers and gave them a week to test my game and have gotten all their questionnaires back by now and wanted to present the results to you, but that's after the stats. In the past 2 weeks I, again, sent out the QA prototype build and questionnaires after making the prototype work with some minor additions, changed some things about the character designs, I continued writing chapter 2, and I evaluated the QA results and added them to the devlog. And what I'm going to do from now on is I'm not going to include the work hours, because actually I think nobody finds that interesting besides me, and there are a lot of work to make compared to how useful they are. I'm still keeping track of my work hours, and sorry if you hear noise, there's like a helicopter right over our house. Yeah, I'm still keeping track of my work hours and how much time I spent on what, but I'm not going to continue including them in the devlogs because they take a lot of time and nobody watches them, I feel. Okay, so the QA results. I had 6 QA testers in total for this round, and some of them had prior experience with visual novels and some didn't, which I found to be a lucky coincidence. Some of the results were mixed and some were surprising, so I think it might be interesting to take a look at them. There will be no names mentioned or shown because it doesn't matter for the arguments I will be making. What I found the most interesting was maybe part the expectation of the players for the game, and if they had prior played any visual novels, and if yes, which ones. In short, the game works, so I will not go through the answers that were given there because all testers agreed on the fact that nothing crashed and everything worked as intended. And now here's the thing I found the most interesting, and also a little bit amusing actually. And this was about which talk sprites the players preferred. All of them said that they prefer the ones facing sideways, and only one tester preferred the front-facing ones. And this is actually explained by their prior experience with visual novels. You see, this person mentioned that they preferred the front-facing ones, and also mentioned that they played Danganronpa, and most of the characters' talk sprites are facing forward in this game. I mean, okay, they also mentioned BlazBlue and Guilty Gear story modes, but those aren't technically their own games, and because the focus is more on fighting, so I wouldn't consider them visual novels. But I'm glad that they included this anyway. I wanted to specifically mention Danganronpa because I don't think that it's coincidence that this is the only person who played it from the testers, and also the only person who preferred the front-facing sprites. And also from the rest of their questionnaires, the gist I got is, yeah, well, your game isn't quite like Danganronpa because it's quite similar in the genre, but it's not quite that, and I just wanted to answer to this tester in the way like, yeah, but the studio that made Danganronpa is a 200-person team, I think, and I'm just one person, so there is no way I will be able to make a game of that caliber. I didn't write them, of course, but this was something that both amused me and kind of bugged me. Otherwise, I will set this on what the majority liked, which I would personally also prefer. One thing I also found very important in terms of game and narrative design is that 3 out of 6 testers got the good ending on their first playthrough, which is something I asked. You might think now, yeah, but Christina, isn't that a good thing? And to that I say, no, I want my players to suffer. I've always had the philosophy in terms of storytelling, and now as a game designer / narrative designer, that good endings need to be earned. And the fact that the good ending is apparently very easy to get means that I need to make some changes in the game design, which fits other points of critique on the story I got from the testers anyway, so there's nothing to debate about that. To whom it might concern, one player got the worst ending on their first playthrough and the other 2 got the bad ending, and this confirms my hypothesis that the good ending is too easy to get, because the endings should be easy to get in this order: worst ending, bad ending, good ending, and apparently I designed it backwards, which is a good thing to know as a game and narrative designer. Apart from the endings, I also asked the testers who their favorite characters were, and the results were not actually surprising. 2.5 votes said Bloodlines was their favorite character, while 1.5 vote were saying Jason was their favorite character. Simon and Nancy got 1 vote each, and makes me chuckle just a little bit because Nancy's my personal favorite character, but I see why people might not like her and prefer Bloodlines instead. What I also found very funny that one person said that they absolutely hated Bloodlines and they wanted to, in quotes, slap her, and while almost 3 other testers said that they liked Bloodlines very much and felt sad when bad things happened to her in the story. And I think that's that's interesting because it shows just like that people like different things in stories, and I can't cater to everyone, but kind of the intention is that all characters are kinda unlikable, so if some people say they like Bloodlines and some people say they don't, that's basically what I wanted to achieve. I also asked the testers if they found the story to progress logically, and I was surprised that the results were very mixed. Some complaints were not surprising, for example that I didn't go into detail with the characters and that there were some minor plot holes that can be just solved by giving more information. But I'm glad that the testers mentioned that all the same, because that's important to know. And most testers also found the prison scene to be very confusing, which is something I get to in just a second. The thing is, I was confused by the fact that I think 3 or 4 testers said that they found the story to be logical in terms of progression, and either 3 or 2 people, I'm not sure, I would need to get through the questionnaires again, they said that they found the story to be illogical, but they didn't quite tell me why. They just said, I didn't like this, I didn't like this, and I didn't like this. And I especially remember one tester saying they didn't like the scene in the motel where they get clothes, so but nobody else had a problem with that, so I'm not sure what they meant. Yeah, but what I'm going to do is focusing more on the progression of the story. It gets better over time. I'm absolutely against this statement, especially for games, because not everybody has the energy or the time to get through like 10 hours of gameplay to get to the good stuff. And I personally know this about myself. For example, the reason why I never watched Game of Thrones is that it bored me. The first 2 episodes I found so utterly boring and uninteresting that I never got to watch it. And people said, well, but it gets better in the 2nd season. I'm just like, I don't care. If it's not if it doesn't hook me, it doesn't need to be good. It needs to hook the reader, the viewer, the player in the first couple minutes. And that brings me to a thing that I was told literary agent some time ago, and I've been keeping this very close to my heart. And he said, quote paraphrased, if your reader isn't hooked by page 17, then they will not continue reading. So basically, this is what I've been working with for the past 6 years, especially with my first novel, and that is to try and make the first couple minutes or pages of the book as interesting as possible. There doesn't need to be like very crazy stuff happening. It just needs to kind of raise questions, and the reader needs to want and know more about the questions. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of hard to explain in English. Yeah, but anyways, if your game gets good after 10 hours, I don't want it. I'm just sorry. Except if it's a game that, like Dark Souls, is built around being frustrating. I don't think that the it gets good over time statement is something we should actually adhere to, because I mean, most games don't even reach the 10-hour gameplay mark. For example, most AAA titles that are not built around narrative design don't even have campaigns or like single-player modes that last for 10 hours. And I am a person, if the game doesn't have 20 hours worth of content, I don't want it. And that's basically because I just prefer narrative games. This, of course, doesn't apply to indie games, but it applies to most, like, AA and AAA games. TLDR, first impression and hooks are everything, and I need to work on the prologue more. One tester also mentioned that the characters need to be fleshed out more at this stage, so that's something I'm going to do. And then I'm also curious to hear what they have to say after more story has been implemented, because more issues might arise then. It's like, you have 100 bugs, you fix one, you have 130 bugs. It's kind of the same with writing stories. Like, the less story you have, the less issues people will have with it, and the larger the story gets, the more confusing and the more plot holes will arise. Then I had a little segment at the end of the questionnaire, which was about personal opinions specifically. And most people seem to enjoy jokes and character dynamics in the game, so I will include more. I was on the fence about including memes, and I decided to not do that because memes get outdated very quickly, and people whose main tongue might not be English or who just are not very versed in memes might not get the joke, so I will focus on character dynamics because I think the best jokes are character dynamics anyways. So yeah, I will try to develop more on that side. Oh yeah, and while going through the questionnaires a second time for this devlog, I noticed that the majority said that they would like to choose a character at the beginning. And while I respect that opinion, because most visual novels, if not all, offer that option at the beginning of the game, or at least give your character a name, I will not do that in Dead on Arrival. Well, I think one tester even mentioned that they found it confusing to have control over multiple characters, but I have made the conscious decision back when pitching the game that it will not be a feature to choose your character. I think I mentioned this in the first devlog, but going through my pitch, I never explained why I didn't want to give the player the option. I just wrote something along the lines of, having the story be told by the perspective of one character would be a disservice to the plot. And while that sounds awfully pretentious, because it is, it's the core of what I meant. Mild spoilers ahead for the game. Skip to the timestamp on screen if you want to avoid spoilers for the plot. The reason why I don't let the player choose the playable character is because Simon would be revealed as the bad guy either way, i.e., if I don't let the player choose him, they will immediately know that something is wrong, and that will make him suspicious. And if I let the characters choose Simon to play as, the game basically turns into Murder Simulator. And while that idea of a murder simulator in terms of a visual novel is not uninteresting, it's not the point of the game. Don't get me wrong, I do like the idea of players being able to choose their favorite character in this game, but at the same time this would mean, in essence, that I will be making the same game 4 times. And that is a lot of work, and it needs a lot of time, which I don't have. I'm not a studio with more than one developer, and I won't be able to extend the production time further than intended, because that's the time when the new semester begins, and the game needs to be done by then. TLDR, I will try my best to make the story less confusing, but I will not add the option to choose a character, because that's a decision I made as a game designer, a game writer, and a project manager. And even if it just hurts me a little bit to say this, adding it would take too much time and not add much to the story. Because, yeah, it's just the way I designed the plot and the game. And before anyone says anything, I know that games change their concept during development, but those things are often just cosmetic decisions, like we don't want our game to take place in, I don't know, ancient Egypt and instead in ancient Rome or something. I just kind of thought of Assassin's Creed, because the game mechanics remain the same, and I'm not going to say that the plot is that deep and engaging. I'm just gonna be a little bit careful with that. But yeah, it's usually that the core gameplay and mechanics stay intact, and otherwise the games don't change much. And in my case, that would mean that I would have need to change the entire game concept for Simon and the other characters, because you have 4 characters, and because they split up around somewhere in the game, it's gonna be very confusing, and I'm just going to try and work around that. Otherwise, I think that that's the essence of what happened in the last 2 weeks. For now, I will make changes to the story structure as per demand by the QA testers, and I will also start to make the final sprites for the game. I'm a little scared because both of these take ages to complete, and it's one of the moments where I wish that I wasn't alone on this project. But yeah, we're gonna try. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I mentioned the new social media accounts at the beginning, but my old ones are still in the description for you to check out. And I hope you have a nice week and that we will see each other next time I upload a video. Bye!